ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. In the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. This is our 17th session on lesson 14 of the book Philosophical Instructions. This lesson is mostly concerned with the acquired knowledge or conceptual knowledge, and that is what we call it in Arabic al-ilm al-husuli, which is in contrast to al-ilm al-huduri or knowledge by presence. We said that knowledge by presence is a sort of knowledge in which the object of knowledge, that is what is known, is present, and there is no need to have an image of that acting between the knower and what is known, between al-alim and al-ma'lum. So instead of having an image, we have the object or what is known directly known to us because it's present. Either it is our knowledge about ourselves or about our feelings or our faculties or about our cause, or sometimes about our effects. Then we said that knowledge by presence, because of this freedom from any need for an object, is certain. From any need for an image, it's certain. The object itself is present. There is no image. So there is no question whether this image exactly, accurately corresponds to the object or not. So you don't make any mistakes in regard to knowledge by presence. Knowledge by presence is certain. It's immune from mistakes. But unfortunately, knowledge by presence, it's not enough to build a system of metaphysics upon, or for example, other sciences. Because as we said, knowledge by presence is limited to certain things: ourselves, our feelings, our faculties, our cause and effects. But anything other than that must be known in an acquired way, in a conceptual way, by usage of certain images. So this is very important for us to discuss the accuracy of al-ilm al-husuli, or knowledge which is acquired or conceptual knowledge. This is why this lesson is dedicated to and devoted to this issue, to the acquired knowledge. And the author, first of all, starts with explanation of the reason for which we have allocated this lesson or devoted this lesson to this issue. Okay, let's go to the core substance of this lesson. After this introduction, the author talks about idea and affirmation. If you look at the screen, you will see that, please look at the screen. Okay. We have two terms which are very important in logic, in formal logic. Tasavvur and tasdiq. It may come with alif and lam or without. For example, if they are added to something. This is the transliteration. At-tasavvur and at-tasdiq. Okay? So, by tasavvur, we mean a notion, an idea, which has the potentiality of reflecting something. For example, in my mind, I may have an image or an idea of someone or some things, like, for example, a book or, for example, a pen, and so on. In tasavvur, which has been translated in this book by the translator, Dr. Legenhausen, as idea, and it may be also translated as notion. By tasavvur, we mean a concept or an image which has this possibility of showing or representing something without making any judgment. When you have a tasavvur or an idea about something, it means that you have an understanding of that. It means that its image or his or her image is in your mind, but without making any judgment. But when you have tasdiq, and that is affirmation, you have some judgment. So you have an idea as subject, then another idea as predicate, and then a judgment. For example, you say that Hassan is good. When you say, or even if you do not say, but you have in your mind this affirmation, Hassan is good in your mind. So Hassan is an idea, good is another idea. When you consider the relation between these two, you may come to the conclusion that Hassan is good. So you want to put it in a propositional form, and you use it as an affirmation, make Hassan as subject, good as predicate, and then you say Hassan is good. If you look at again at the screen, so for example, we say A is B. Okay, this is our subject, this is our predicate, and this is very important because links these together. So without this, you cannot explain that these two are linked together. And if you think that the relation is negative, instead of saying A is B, you may say A is not or isn't B, and again, is not, although denies existence of relation between A and B, but it's in another sense making these two related together, but in a negative way. So it's different from just saying A and B. When you say A and B, there is no relation. But when you use is or is not, you make them related. You make a sentence, you make a proposition, you make a judgment. This judgment may be positive, may be affirmative, may be negative. But it's much different than just saying A and then saying B. So, whenever we have an affirmation, whenever we have tasdeeq, we should have a subject, a predicate, and a judgment about the relation between these two. This is why some people say that there are 4 elements in each affirmation: subject, predicate, relation or nisbah, and hukm or judgment. So it's good if you learn these in Arabic. It's not necessary, but it will help you so that when you read classical text in its original language, in the original languages, you can understand. So we have A, which is this is subject, okay. Then we have B, which is our predicate. For subject we use al-mawzu. Okay, it's now clearer. For predicate we say al-mahmul. Al-mawzu is mawzu is like this. And then we have al-mahmul. So as you see, mawzu in itself is an idea. Mahmul is also an idea, but we need to put them together. So what makes them linked, what makes them connected is a verb or auxiliary verb like is or is not. In some languages they don't use necessarily a verb. Maybe the structure makes this. For example, in Arabic, when you say Zaydun qa'imun, so you have Zayd as your subject and qa'im as your predicate, and this structure of sentence shows that they are related to each other. And it's also possible to use a verb like kana and say kana Zaydun qa'iman to show this relation. So please look again. So you have A is B. As I said, some people say that there are 4 elements. A, and that's subject. Or let's say al-mawdu. B, and that's mahmul, you are familiar. Then you have relation between A and B. You should consider the relation between them, and then judgment. By relation we mean an-nisbah. An-nisbah. By judgment we mean al-hukm. So you cannot have any affirmation unless there are these four. That is subject, second al-mahmul or predicate, you are already familiar, relation and judgment. But some people, instead of counting these four as four parts of affirmation, they just count three. They say subject, predicate, judgment. But you know that there can be no judgment without considering the relation. It's not that much, I think, troubling, that much important. So up to now, we have been discussing about division of knowledge, of course acquired knowledge, by logicians into idea and affirmation, into tasawwur and tasdiq. Then we said that each affirmation has four elements: subject, predicate, relation and judgment. Some people call the very judgment itself affirmation. This is another sense in which the term tasdiq is used. So sometimes they call the whole package affirmation or tasdiq. Sometimes they focus on judgment, which is something new. You don't have this in ideas. Even if you have hundreds of ideas, as long as there is no judgment, you have no affirmation. So this is why they focus on judgment and say that this is also called tasdiq. These are two different senses of the same term, tasdiq or affirmation. And you should always be sensitive about different senses, because otherwise you may get confused. Some people have said that whenever we have an affirmation in a positive way, we have subject, predicate, relation and judgment. But when we have a negative sentence, so there is no judgment. But this is not true. As I said, even in negative sentences, we have to judge. When I say Ali is not B, for example, Ali is not standing, I am making a judgment. It means that I have considered Ali, I have considered standing and the relation between them, and then I made my judgment. I said Ali is not B. Although the judgment is negation of the quality of standing, but still it's a judgment. So it's not true to say that in negative sentences there is no judgment. Or some people have said that in certain propositions in which the predicate is identical with the subject, again there is no judgment. For example, if I say A is A, man is man, or man is a thinking animal, because the subject, and that is man, is identical with man or with thinking animal, so there is no judgment, because there is no two separate things. This is not also true. Here when I say Ali is Ali, or man is man, or man is thinking animal, I am making a judgment. And my judgment is that these two are identical. So you cannot find any affirmation, any proposition without having a judgment. Otherwise, it will not be a proposition. It will not be an affirmation. So I think we have been able to establish the fact that in each affirmation we must have 4 elements: subject, predicate, consideration of the relation between these two, and then finally making a judgment. If you are in doubt, if you do not make any judgment, this is not an affirmation. Okay. Some logicians, Western logicians, have had the idea that whenever we have an affirmation, we have only 2 ideas, 2 tasawwur, which are connected to each other, and there is no real judgment in the sense that the traditional logic says. It's just a matter of having 2 connected ideas, 2 associated ideas. For example, you may have heard this idea in psychology, the idea of tada'i ma'ani, or association of ideas. Sometimes there is a person who is so close to his friend that they always come together and go together, sit together, work together, study together, even make trips together. This causes that whenever you remember one of them, automatically you remember the other. Whenever you conceive of the image of one of them, you conceive of the image of the other. They are so closely associated to each other. So without any reason, without any causal explanation, because there is no necessity here, there is no causality here, but because it has always happened, or it has frequently happened, whenever the first comes to your mind, it brings the second automatically. So they say in affirmation we just have 2 ideas which are associated with each other, and one of them brings the other. If I say Zaydun qa'imun, Zayd is standing, so it's because of the associatedness of these 2 concepts that I can make an affirmation. But this is not true, and this is not correct, because we have many propositions in which these 2 concepts are not associated, and also even if they are associated, it's much different from making affirmation. You may have 2 concepts together and stop making any judgment. If I say Ali and then it brings to my mind, for example, another person, Mahmoud, then does this mean that there must be a relation between them? I must make a judgment. So there are 2 main objections here, and much more, but two main that I have mentioned. One, when I say Ali is standing, so the concept of standing is not associated to the concept of Ali. I may imagine them separately. The second objection is that even if we suppose that these 2 are associated to each other, I may have them in my mind, I still may not make any judgment about their relation. So this idea is not acceptable, and we need to have this judgment. Okay. Having said these ideas about affirmation, the nature of affirmation and the elements which are involved in affirmation, and this idea that some people have about affirmation, now let's focus on at-tasawwur, on idea. There are different divisions for idea. According to one division or classification, we say that each idea is either universal or particular. An idea is universal if it is possible to be applied to more than one thing, to many things. I say it's possible to be applied. You do not need to have actual cases or individuals, but the concept in itself has this potentiality. Like the concept of man, the concept of book, the concept of tree, the concept of flower. All these concepts are universal because they can be applied to many different individuals or cases. Even if there is no flower at all, there were no flower at all in the world, still the concept is universal. If all human beings die, still the concept of man is universal. Suppose that there is no human being and they totally disappear, and suppose that for example, we don't believe in the survival of the spirits. Suppose, just suppose. Still the concept of man, without having any individual, is a universal concept. Why? Because it's possible to be applied to more than one person. But a universal concept is to be distinguished from an individual or particular concept, which is only possible to be applied to one thing. For example, if someone is called Fatima, this concept of Fatima is only applicable to her. It's only a name for her. Whenever she was named, whenever she is mentioned by this name, for example, the surname is mentioned or something to make sure that this is the Fatima which is meant, it only applies to this. You may have different people called Fatima, but each Fatima is exclusive to one person. You cannot say, for example, Fatima, and then you don't know what you mean by Fatima. So in particular names, please be very careful here, because some people make mistake. You don't have a universal concept. You have one term for one person, but this term may be coined several times for several people, but independently and exclusively. Okay? Or for example, when we say Mecca, and that is the holy city of Mecca, or Medina. So Mecca or Medina are particular names. They are possible to be applied only to an individual city, a particular city. But the concept of city itself is a universal concept. Okay. Having said that, logicians have tried to go into further divisions. So first, they say that tasawwur or idea is divided into two, al-kulli and al-juz'i. Please look at the screen. Okay. So you have al-kulli okay, which is universal, and al-juz'i, which is particular or individual. So as we said, idea is either universal or particular. Then there is a further division, or you could say parallel division. For example, another division is to divide ideas into perceptual ideas, al-hissi, or you could say, for example, you may translate it in other ways, for example, sensory ideas, whatsoever, but perhaps perceptual is good, in which you have an image which is related to something that you perceive, you understand by one of your senses. You may call it sensual idea as well. For example, if I have seen something, as long as the process of seeing is going on, and even shortly after I close, for example, my eyes, or the position is changed, very shortly, still you have that perception in your mind. This is called at-tasawwur al-hissi, or sensory or sensual or perceptive idea. Or when I, for example, put my finger on something and I feel it, as long as I am feeling that, and shortly after I remove my finger, there is this idea, which is perceptual, which is sensual. But if later, after this process of feeling is finished, if later I remember that image again, I remember that idea again, the idea of what I saw, or what I, for example, felt, or what I smelled, this image is given another name to distinguish between the image which is which coincides with the sensation, and the image which is put in our memory. The second, I mean the image which is comes to our mind after the process of sensation is finished, this is called tasawwur al-khiyali. And khiyali is translated in different ways. Some people have translated it as imaginary ideas, as you see in the book on page 111. It's called imaginary ideas, and I personally also think that this is a good translation. But the problem is that sometimes people, when they hear imaginary, they think that it must be something which is unreal. But you should know that here by imaginary we mean something related to image and not necessarily unreal. Okay, so if I saw yesterday in a garden, in a botanic garden, a flower, a beautiful flower, as long as I was seeing that flower, I was looking at that flower, that was a perceptual or sensory idea. If today I think about it, then this is an imaginary idea. The third sort of ideas which are mentioned in the same page are called the ideas of prehension, and that is al-wahm. Al-wahm. And that is related to a sort of particular ideas which are not possible to be understood or felt by ordinary senses. For example, a sense of love and affection towards something, somebody. Even animals have this. They say that, for example, logicians say that, for example, a cat may have a feeling of hostility when there is a dog. So a feeling of hostility towards dog. This feeling is not a universal feeling. It's a particular hostility. They call it at-tasawwur al-wahmi, idea by prehension. And wahm here is to be distinguished from wahm, which means illusion, because in Arabic sometimes wahm means some mistake, some error, some illusion, especially if it is used as tawahhum. But here by wahm they mean a sort of, as I said, a sort of particular concept or particular idea which is not possible to be understood by five senses, like feeling of affection or friendship or love, or feeling of hatred, hostility, and so on about a particular thing. The author has some suspicion about whether this is really a new form of particular ideas or not, or for example whether animal have the same feeling like us or so on. He says these are things that can be discussed and addressed separately, but whatever we feel by ourselves as our own spiritual, or you could say psychological feelings, these things are particular images, particular ideas, and it can include our feeling of, for example, fear or hostility or affection or friendship. And maybe sometimes it's a sort of knowledge by presence. Maybe you make an image of that, so there is no direct feeling of hostility, and then that image is a form of conceptual knowledge. So this is something that the author wants to remind us, not to forget that if there is a direct feeling, it is a knowledge by presence and not a conceptual or acquired knowledge. So this is not to be included under the general title of idea. Then the author continues with a very important discussion about the universal concepts. There has been a very long history of debate over universal concepts, especially in medieval ages. This debate was sometimes in some centuries very heated. There were a group of philosophers or theologians and philosophers who had the idea which was known as nominalism. these people denied the existence of universal concepts. They had the idea that there is no such a thing as a universal concept. For example, the concept of man, the concept of flower, the concept of book, in their views, are not universal concepts. These are concepts which are given different meanings, different senses, parallel to each other by different acts of coining them for those meanings. Do you remember what I said about, for example, a term like Fatima? I said a term like Fatima is not universal. Although different people may be called Fatima, but each person is separately named Fatima. And Fatima is only applicable to one person. Okay? They say the same thing about concepts that we take to be universal. They say when you say man, although man can be applied to this man and that man, but each is called man separately. And this is very strange idea, because there are many things that help us to distinguish between a concept which is univocal and a concept which is equivocal. If it was like Fatima or like any other term which has been given different meaning in different acts of coining the term for some meaning, you always were in need of having some evidence to be able to identify which person, which case is meant. If I just say Fatima without any evidence showing which Fatima is meant, there is no Fatima here, I have never spoken about Fatima before, and you cannot understand which Fatima is meant. So the term would be ambiguous. But it's not the case like man. All individual people can be applied, can be included under the title man. And man includes them all together, not in parallel. It's not just one man that must be called man, and then you need to identify that. No. This is man. At the same time, the person next to him is a man, and the person next to the second is also a man. So when we say that we have universal concepts, it's totally different from having a univocal term, an equivocal term. So this is something that we have to bear in mind. And the idea of nominalism is very strange, but they had some other problems, and that led them to come to this strange conclusion so that they can solve those other problems. But I think everyone clearly understands, if there is no problem, no confusion, that we have concepts which are universal and can be applied to more than one case. The other view is the view of those people who again denied universal concepts, but they had the idea that universal concepts are ambiguous concepts. A concept, as long as it is very accurate, it's particular. For example, if you have an image of a person with all details, it can be applied only to that person. But if you forget something about that person and the concept becomes ambiguous, that you may make mistake, and for example you may take another person in place of the first person. So whenever you have ambiguous concept, it may be applied to more than one person. Like a coin. If a coin is new, you know what is the value of this coin and to what country it belongs. But if the coin is thrown out, then you don't know what's the value. You say it may be this, maybe that, maybe for this country, maybe for that country. Then it becomes universal. It means that it can be applied to more than one coin. But again, this is wrong. When you have an ambiguous idea, it can be applied only to one thing in reality. You don't know whether that is this one or that one, so you should stop. But whenever you have a universal concept, you know for sure that it can be applied to both of them. It's not a matter of either or. It's a matter of this and that. So it's quite different. The third view about the universal concepts is the famous idea of Plato, who had the idea of what we call it in Arabic methal, and the plural form is muthal, and in English is translated as ideas. And that is that he believed as a certain form of existence, abstract existence for the universals. So in addition to individual people, individual men, you have a universal man, an abstract form of man, which is archetype of man. And this is the idea which is very much discussed, and this is a very important idea. And inshallah we will study this idea and the other idea which is more acceptable to the most of Muslim philosophers in the first session. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.